Hi, today I will be talking about the Department of Public Safety. The Department of Public Safety was established in 1969 under Minnesota Statute 299A in favor of efficiency. The powers and duties of the Department of Children, Families and Learning, the Office of Drug Policy and Violence Prevention, Community Advisory Violence Prevention Council were all transferred to the DPS. The State Highway Patrol and the Driver's License Bureau, both formerly part of the Minnesota Highway Department, were transferred to the DPS in 1970. Its main guidelines are efficiency, to prevent the waste or unnecessary spending of public money, to manage the state's resources and operate the department as efficiently as possible, to use technology where appropriate to increase agency productivity, and to recommend changes in law when necessary. The Commissioner shall report to the chairs and the ranking minority members of the Senate and House of Representative committees on the performance of the agency operations and the accomplishment of the agency's goals and the agency's biennial budget. The limitation I found was no delegation or assignment of power or duty by the Commissioner to an employee shall be made, resulting in a reenactment of the powers or responsibilities. Currently, as you can see in this organizational chart, the commissioner is Donna Doman, and Deputy Commissioner Cassandra O'Hearn, and Assistant Commissioner Bob Hawkins. So the DPS commissioner is assigned or appointed by the governor, and the commissioner appoints a deputy commissioner, and from then on, an assistant commissioner to help with the various agencies under their command. The DPS has its hands in almost everything that can potentially cause harm to the individuals residing within the state, from liquor control to driver's licenses, drugs, and investigating the cause of death for individuals, as well as providing human trafficking victims with help, making sure that wheelchair lifts on public transportation are properly secured and properly maintained. Basically, anything and everything that can cause a person harm is under the DPS's areas of discretion. However, the DPS also has jurisdiction over these other sub-agencies. The Alcohol and Gambling Enforcement is to provide uniform interpretation, regulation, and enforcement of the state's state's liquor and gambling laws, and to ensure the management of their licensing, their regulation and enforcement of the licensing of the beverage and gaming industries. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, otherwise known as BCA, is to prevent and solve crimes in partnership with law enforcement, public safety, and other criminal justice agencies. It has 4 sections of investigation: criminal justice training, and education, forensic sciences, and the Minnesota Justice Information System. The Division of Emergency Communication Networks, they permit public safety officials, emergency personnel, state and federal agencies to communicate easily with each other and provide an immediate response in case of emergencies. The Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency protects and helps people in the wake of natural disasters like tornadoes, floods, and ice storms, incidents that can harm people like chemical spills and train derailments, or acts of terror and other pre-planned events. The Office of Justice Programs provides leadership and resources to reduce crime in Minnesota. The State Fire Marshal Division fosters or tries to foster a fire-safe environment through investigation, enforcement, regulation, and emergency response. Highway State Patrol, I'm sure we're all familiar with what they do. And then Capitol Security and Traffic Security, it's basically our police departments in those areas. As for rulemaking, the DPS follows the procedures outlined in the Administrative Procedure Act and the Minnesota Statutes Chapter 14. So therefore, it is subject to judicial review, and any person agreed by the final decision in a contested case is entitled to a judicial review as long that it is filed within the Court of Appeals and served to all parties, no with not to exceed before 30 days after the party receives a final decision and order of the agency. So since the DPS is subject to Chapter 14, any and all of the hearings of this agency are required to be conducted by an administrative law judge. As for access of information, the DPS has access to a variety of databases, including the CIBRS, which is the Comprehensive Incident-Based Reporting System. It's a database to which Minnesota law enforcement agencies voluntarily submit data about incidents that may be of interest to other law enforcement agencies within the state. It is no use of this CIBRS, according to the statute, should be used outside the pending of a criminal matter, and no recipient can redisclose the data that is received. However, the Department of Public Safety is able to access this data as long as it's in or within for law enforcement related activities. But they also have the computerized criminal history, that has data on arrests, convictions, sentences of persons, driver's license data, Minnesota Hot Files, which is a list of wanted persons, gang members, and protection orders, motor vehicle data, so your registration and your plate numbers, the sex offender registry. They also have access to the federal Hot Files, the Federal Interstate Identification Index, and the International Justice and Public Safety Network. So it has access to the driver's licenses and vehicle registrations, not only from the United States, but from Canada and Mexico as well. They also have various information from commercial databases, which can include anything from your address, your phone number, your relatives, associates, and property. If you ever place your information in a third party and that third party sells your data, the DPS more than likely has access to it. I found also this little graph over here on the law enforcement's access to database through the Department of Public Safety divisions. It's actually really cool to look at, and if you read the entire thing, you can see how it's just one big circle of information. Currently, the state statutes regulate this as, data that shouldn't be used for anything outside of, legal, but there is very little oversight on how this data is actually being used, so it's actually kind of a bit concerning if you look more into it, but that's for another thing. So moving on to the next thing. In the DPS, like most government agencies, it has a website, and it provides actually a lot of online services and information and tools that you can use. The most common used is the driver and vehicle services. You can actually go and pre-apply for a driver's license or an ID. So basically, you just fill out all the forms they're going to ask you to before at your house, before you get there, to save you some time. You can also fill out other paperwork for like any forms. For example, if you go to the alcohol forms, basically if you're going to put in a request to have a liquor license or anything like that, you just have to go to the drop down that changes to the division and go to the alcohol and gambling enforcement page and go from there. And each page under the divisions has their own forms and has their own data. So do the board of committees, the programs, related links. There, the court system, it gives you the information of everything you need to either make a claim, put a report, request licenses. It's actually everything is in there. And it also provides data practices, crash facts, fire statistics. So anything and everything you can need, it's on there. You can also get the contact information of whatever agencies you're trying to find. So it's actually very helpful information. Um, there wasn't anything that I couldn't find on this website for this research project, so it was actually very, very helpful. And the following slide is just my sources. Um, the link for the Office of the Legislative Auditor actually has the paper that I was talking about earlier about databases and the Department of Public Safety in Minnesota and their use. So if you want to look at it, it's a pretty interesting read. But other than that, that concludes my presentation.